For some reason, Giannis seems to attract a lot of polarizing opinions from former players and talking heads. It's to the point now where there's actually a lot of misconceptions about his game in terms of what he actually is capable of. At the end of this video, I'm going to go over why I think he attracts so much debate around his game, but first I want to go through each of these quote-unquote myths about his ability and see how much truth there is. This is going to be the start of a series where I look at common misconceptions around players' games and see whether or not they're actually true. Let me know in the comments and give me some other players that you want me to do this with. Now let's kick things off with myth number 1. Giannis hasn't added anything new to his game. There's a subset of NBA fans that think Giannis is a very one-dimensional player that relies on sheer athleticism and size to contribute to winning, and that's how he's always operated. But is that actually true? To answer that, you have to ask yourself the question of what has Giannis added to his game outside of scoring on the interior? Well, first and foremost, he's added a mid-range element to his scoring arsenal. If you go back to his first All-Star season in 2016, he shot only 35% on long mid-range shots, which are mid-range shots outside of 14 feet from the basket. This past season, he shot 44% on long mid-range shots. On mid-range shots as a whole, he shot 37% from the mid-range during the 2016-2017 season, but it's up to 41% this past season, which is right around league average from mid-range. Giannis's mid-range game has come quite a long way from his early All-Star seasons. He didn't look very comfortable taking these back then, and you can tell that defenses recognized this, so they didn't really honor him from the mid-range that much. Now, it's one of the most important aspects of his game. Defenses aren't able to sag off him because he can make them pay now when they do. The defensive attention that he warrants from the mid-range now allows him to manipulate defenses even more than he already could, just from leveraging his rim pressure. It's safe to say that this myth is busted. Myth number 2, Giannis has no skill. At this point, I'm not even sure what skill means, because for some reason it seems to be as though only players with flashy ball handling and fancy layup packages are able to be called skilled nowadays. Is defense not a skill? Is post footwork not a skill? Is offhand finishing not a skill? Is playmaking not a skill? Because to me, all of those things are skills, and Giannis has all of them. Giannis is considered one of, if not the best defender in the NBA. If defense isn't a skill, then why aren't more players the level of defender that Giannis is? It just doesn't make any sense. Passing is one of the most important skills that a player can have as a primary option for their team. Giannis averaged 5.8 assists per game this past season. He's the primary ball handler and offensive facilitator for the Bucks. The entire offense runs through him. If he wasn't skilled, do you really think that the Bucks would be using him as the focal point of their entire offensive game plan? Then you look at his ability to post up. There are guys in the league that are bigger than Giannis, guys that are taller than him. So again, I ask you, if this doesn't take any skill, then why aren't more guys able to score in the post as efficiently as Giannis? Not a lot of guys have the footwork and the finishing ability that he has. To me, skill has become a term used to move the goalposts and discredit the abilities of certain players that don't fit this quote-unquote pure hooper mold. But if Giannis wasn't skilled, there's no way he'd be producing the way that he does and as effectively as he does. Are there areas of the game where he's less skilled than his peers? Absolutely. But for every area of the game that Giannis lacks skill, he more than makes up for with his skill in other areas. Once again, this myth can be considered busted. Myth number 3. Giannis doesn't understand how to play basketball. The idea that a guy that has won 2 MVPs, a championship, finals MVP, a Defensive Player of the Year award, and is widely considered to be well on his way to becoming one of the greatest basketball players of all time somehow doesn't understand basketball is one of the most asinine things I've ever heard. I think one area of the game that allows us to see Giannis's understanding of basketball is in his help defense. Help defense is quickly becoming one of the most sought after traits from a front court defender. Right now, it's hard to come by because it requires a significant level of understanding NBA defenses to successfully provide help defense. There's arguably no player in the NBA right now that holds a candle to Giannis when it comes to help defense. If you don't understand how to play basketball, you're going to be blowing tons of defensive rotations and generally be an overall defensive liability for your team. Defensive liability isn't exactly a term I would use to describe Giannis. Then you look at his playmaking and overall floor vision. Giannis understands how his scoring gravity collapses defenses, resulting in his teammates being left open on the perimeter. He understands how his screening and initiation of dribble handoffs gets open looks for the shooters surrounding him. He understands when to punish mismatches and when defenses are set up in a way that's going to allow him to score. So this myth that Giannis doesn't understand basketball, busted. Myth number 4, Giannis hasn't improved his weaknesses. This is one where there's some nuance. There are weaknesses that he hasn't improved on, but there are a lot of them that he has. His perimeter shooting really hasn't improved a ton over the years. I will say that. He's pretty much been right around 30% since 2016. His free throw shooting is another common weakness of his game that gets brought up. If you look at the raw free throw efficiency since becoming an all-star, he hasn't improved, and you might be able to make the argument that he actually got worse. But there's a difference between being a 77% free throw shooter on only 7.7 attempts per game and being a 72% free throw shooter on double-digit free throws per game. Over the last few years, since Giannis has been around 10 free throws per game, he's been a sub 70% free throw shooter. This past season, however, he's improved to a 72% free throw shooter on a career high number of attempts per game. 72%, while not great, is still much more acceptable for a big man, and it's clear that he's made an effort to improve, and the numbers reflect that. He's drastically improved his overall efficiency as well. He went from a 22.9 point per game score in the 2016-17 season on 15.7 attempts per game with 60% true shooting. Now he's a 29.9 point per game scorer on 18.6 field goal attempts per game with 63.3% true shooting. His number of attempts haven't really increased by much, less than 3 shots per game since 2016, yet he's become way more efficient. And think about the defensive attention that Giannis is getting now compared to the defensive attention that he was getting back in 2016. Teams are literally building walls with their defense to try and stop him, yet his efficiency continues to only improve year after year, and his scoring output keeps getting higher and higher. It's safe to say that the myth that Giannis hasn't improved on his weaknesses is busted, with the caveat that there are some weaknesses he can still improve on. But to use that as a knock on Giannis is ridiculous, because you can make that same point with 99% of star caliber players in the NBA. Not every weakness is going to be something that a player ends up improving on, while there are other aspects of a player's game that they will improve on. The 5th and final myth: Giannis can't single-handedly win you games. The idea behind this myth is that Giannis doesn't quote-unquote have that dog in him, that he can't get you a bucket when you need it the most. All you really need to look at to address this myth is Game 6 of the NBA Finals in 2021. Giannis dropped 50 points with 14 rebounds and 5 blocks on 16 of 25 shooting, making all but 2 of his 19 free throws to close out the series against the Phoenix Suns and win a championship. He averaged 35 points over the course of this series and 30 points per game total over the entire 2020-21 playoffs. How is that not a sign that a guy can go out and basically get you a bucket at will? So it's pretty clear that this myth is busted. So why does Giannis attract all of these crazy takes? Why is he seemingly always the target of criticism when it comes to the debate around skill? If I had to venture to guess, the fact that he doesn't have the flashiest game in the world is probably the biggest factor at play. Talking heads, former players, and NBA fans in general really gravitate towards things that are easy to see and therefore easy to appreciate. Things that I mentioned earlier, like flashy dribble moves and fancy layups, things like step back threes, are all things that you can watch and easily appreciate because they're cool and anyone is able to understand what's impressive about it. It's a lot harder to appreciate the skill of things like weak side help defense or generational rim pressure, allowing a player to create offense for their team. These things require an insane amount of skill, but they're not what typically gets associated and talked about when you discuss the idea of skill. Hopefully now, if you didn't already before coming into this video, you can understand why these claims about Giannis are overwhelmingly false and typically rooted in bad faith arguments. Let me know in the comments who you want to see next for this series. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. That's the #1 way to support me and help me continue making content. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.